Frëan.
Right, here we are.
Hey.
Hey.
Wow, look at that painting behind you.
It's pretty good.
Who made that?
It's a Mexican artist. I'll have to get you the name.
Cool. Yeah.
I've got it saved in my files.
Yeah. Please do. So, ready to get started?
Sure.
This is it.
Boom.
So this is Ocean to Ocean with Art Pinsof. That's my body mind. Frëan is the person I'm having a conversation with today. And this is for Nothing Media. Amplifying speakers of what is Frëan.
All right, then.
Are you a speaker of what is?
Who isn't?
Who is and who isn't? The cosmic dance of assuming identity and then assuming a no identity, which might be a great way to start because, I'm trying to avoid talking about these podcast conversations as interviews because I want it to be just whatever just happens, really. But when I first met you, I really liked your story about, and I guess I don't know a lot of your story or most of it, but I know that you spent a lot of time as a seeker following around Rupert Spira, and then Tony and Jim, and then this period since then. And so maybe if you'd like, maybe you could tell us a bit about your story with those assumptions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's kick it off. So I think a big factor for me is like what's been driving me, and that's been a general sense of anxiety or unease, and it seems like whatever situation I'm in, whatever community I'm living in, this anxiety will arise in some form, in some way. And so I've just my interest in non-duality has been about how can I support that, how can I solve that, how can I fix that, and the answer is in a resounding don't. And the stuff with Rupert was a really good way in, because he's just really good at meeting people with all their questions, and just giving a logical framework to engage in this work, and then taking it deeper with the yoga meditations he offers, where you really get to delve deeply into our perceptions and the assumptions we have about our perceptions, that really helps to disentangle so much of our conditioning around that. And then coming into Tony and all the others, again, it was kind of like, in a similar way to Rupert, it was like working with the framing, working with the way in which I was perceiving reality, the way in which I was experiencing reality, and the words, the answers given by the speakers, helping to shift that cognitively, and then there being an invitation for something deeper to take place as a result of that. And so I think that's what the meetings really offer, is a real shift in the way we think and conceive of reality being. And when we're able to shift our framing out of a personal perspective, that opens up the door to something much more deeper, much more energetic than what we're perhaps used to. And so that's what my main interest is these days, is how does that shift happen, and what does that shift lead to? Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's, thanks for telling us that. You know, it, yeah, we tend to have conversations just as friends, like every month or two, and I feel like ever since we've started this, friendship, every time I talk to you, there's always new things to discuss. It feels like new. It always feels new. It always feels like there's something new that you're in the middle of and something new that I'm in the middle of, even though we start from a place of, you know, this non-duality. There's nothing, there's no one. And yet, like the way you started this conversation, I've never heard you frame it that way exactly, I don't think, before. As the first thing you said was that something about an anxiety that was guiding you towards all of these things.
Mm.
Is that right?
Yeah, I guess I could also describe it as like an angst or a contractedness. I mostly experience it physically as a tension in my solar plexus and in my diaphragm and in my ribs.
Wow.
And I find that when I'm listening to the Open Secret messaging, or when I'm approaching it from a different perspective other than what I've become conditioned to do. So, like, if I back up a bit, when I first started meditating, I realized I could trace a lot of my social anxieties and just complications in general down to being rooted in this physical feeling of tension in my solar plexus. And then the first thing was like, okay, so how do I deal with this? And I find that what meditation and what the Open Secret message offers is a way to shift from my conditioned response of this is something that I need to deal with, to just recognizing that it is just what is. It's just energy. And that framing, the shifting of that framing from me being separate from it and me needing to do something about it, to it being just everything, just boundless, energetic happening. There's a real freedom in that. And other little insights have come along with that, where like I've noticed how like the attitude towards it is one of this is a problem, this anxiety is a problem, this tension is a problem, and I need to do something about it. When it's just energy, when it's just alive, then there's the possibility for a deeper appreciation and leaning into it, going into it, tuning into it in a deeper way. I can see that where this anxious energy, this tense energy is coming from is a desire to protect, a desire to connect, to be safe. And somewhere along the way, that desire to connect and to feel secure gets filtered through this sense of being separate, filtered through the sense of being a person. And then the sense of needing to connect and needing to be safe gets attached to the person. And so then it's about me needing to protect myself. me needing to feel safe. And that's a very difficult thing to do in a reality that's constantly shifting and changing. Where do you find security in something that's always changing? But when it's just the energy, when it's just the anxiety without anyone to attach it to, then seeing that more clearly, it's clear that it's just an energy of wanting to connect. And when there's no one for that energy to connect to, then it's just an energy of connection. It's just an energy of loving. It's a yearning to love. And when
Yeah.
that yearning to love isn't filtered through separation, filtered through a person, then it's just love.
Well,
And there's no filter for that. It's just love. And so that's really helped to shift my relationship with this energy on a personal level. Seeing that deeply then transcribes into a personal experience of, oh, this energy of anxiety isn't a problem. It's just misunderstood, or it's misunderstanding. Its view of reality is confused. Yeah. And essentially what it is loving. And that shifts my whole experience of this energy.
it's really incredible, Frëan. I mean, you know, everything you're saying, it touches on a lot of things that I've been going through, or not going through. No, things that I've been experiencing, as art, as a human. And there's this, I found this Carl Jung quote last night where he said, God enters through the wound. And yeah, and which resonates here, whether you call it God or energy or love.
Yeah.
This the word that's been resonating for me lately is wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
Wholeness enters through the wound.
Yeah.
And in a sense, wholeness is the wound, and wholeness is the story around the wound, and wholeness is the attempt to heal the wound. It's all wholeness.
Yeah. So I think, like, in what I'm describing there, is recognizing that the wounding is this loving energy, this boundless, not personalized, not contracted, not separate energy, and it's a way that that recognition can be accessed, but it's also available in everything. It's available in the experience of being a separate individual, because that experience of being separate is itself this loving energy. Nothing is accepted, nothing is denied in that respect.
Absolutely, absolutely. And here I'm going to go even further outside of the format. Not that I have one for this type of thing. Maybe this will break us free of anything that makes this feel like a formal interview, because it's the last thing I want people to think, that this is, two humans here just doing something ordinary, and yet it's all ordinary. I don't know. I'm being silly, but I'm artistic, and I'm also just a character in this play of life, and sometimes there's highs, sometimes there's lows. And if we were just having a conversation off camera, this is something I would share with you. So I want to include this in the podcast because this is what's happening right now. I'm sure something totally different will be happening in a week from now. So, but lately, you could say my heart was broken through a whatever. Something was triggered, deep wound was triggered, and story was attached, but then there's no story. It's like you said, there's just energy. And yet that energy can arise as anything. So even when there was no story, there was one day where I was talking to a friend and everything vanished and became very blissful after suffering, being triggered. And then that happened again. The suffering came back, you know, for lack of a better word. I mean, suffering. But I tried it again where there was no story, but then I just felt the sensation in my body, and it felt like this intense grief and sadness in my heart. But I took away the words and I just felt it, but it actually got more and more intense. And then I just decided to write some poetry from that place.
Mm.
And so I want to share one of the poems I wrote. Yeah.
Good.
So,
Yep.
cool. Yeah. So this is one of the poems I wrote. Actually, the last of 5 that I wrote from that place. Radiant sadness, self-effulgent darkness, absence louder than words, loss brighter than love, grief full of the most congruent energetic expansion, hopelessness dreaming up worlds of infinite color and imaginative beauty, abuse by neglect, leading to this 1,000-petal lotus unfolding until they breathe the air with no oxygen or substance or concepts or dreaming or feeling or knowing of anything. Catatonic response to loss means there is nothing to do and nowhere to get, and everything is unreal and okay, but also okay if not okay, and also never okay absolutely, and also absolutely okay to never have been other than this extraordinary supernova explosion, extreme cataclysmic, impersonally personal Armageddon of catharsis and extraordinary discovery through loss of what never was and always is, and run-on sentences about that which can't be said, which is revealed in the best of times and the worst of times, for the character whose script was written by genetic code and parental conditioning and the good and bad fortune of the environment that neither he or she chose or was chosen for, as the curtain is raised and the brightest emptiness unimaginable is revealed, and emits heartbreak and heartfulness and heart expressiveness as this and this and this and this moment to moment to moment to moment, with no line drawn between, except for the lines that are drawn between, which are part of the never-ending stream of thoughts and words and light and dark, categorized by the mind into infinite boxes until nothing has seemed to be revealed, except that which always was and could only be.
Nice. I love the kind of the almost the tongue twister nature of it, of like, it's kind of the process of how we try to encapsulate this and at the same time unencapsulate it.
Yeah, you got to unencapsulate it. It's like the last time I talked to Jim, you know, I mentioned the word, oh, well, all we have are pointers, right, Jim? And he was like, well, it's more of an unpointer. It's like you said, unencapsulate. Yeah, you're like, it's like you have to speak in opposites to point out that neither is it, quite it.
And both at the same time.
And both at the same time, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think like the words are just really, in a way, just really ridiculous. But what they do offer is this reframing of coming with
You froze for a moment, so yes.
I think what the message offers, because the words are really ridiculous, is that it offers a reframing. Like, we come with our personal framework of reality, and that framework then informs how we perceive reality, and how we perceive reality then informs how reality is, how it's experienced. It informs, yeah, what is from this perception. So when that initial personal framework is underwritten by the open secret message or any other non-dual message, then that gets exchanged for a framework that logically doesn't make any sense if perceived from the previous framework. But this new framework will then shift the way we perceive reality, and then the way we perceive reality shifts how we experience reality.
Right.
And then what is what is, rather than what is being a personal experience.
Yeah,
I think that's what the words do. And then when the words do that, it then opens up the possibility of this energy being apparent. This energy is always apparent. This energy is always available. But when you have the message there, it enables, it gives permission more for that energy to be appreciated.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Again, every time we talk, I feel like I'm getting a new Frëan, a new expression of what is for you. And yet, no, you've been telling me this since the first time we talked about the impact of, I think what I would call the Tony Parsons message. You could just call it the message, but I only say that to say I don't think there's a correct way to say this, and sometimes just my personality sort of has this desire for different flavors of how this is expressed. And so for the moment at least, I'm shying away from the words energy and this message, but there's nothing wrong with those ways of phrasing it. I get it. And I talked, well, yeah, and I know for some people are the opposite of me personality wise, and they would prefer to hear this in a very, consistent way that, and they don't want, you could call it left and right brain. They just want the more right brain version of it. I want the more left brain version, or vice versa. I forget which, but you see what I'm saying. And I'm going on a tangent here as far as what you said, like, as far as the actual, like, what you're pointing to, it resonates deeply always. And it's why I love talking to you and people like you, because it's like, and Tony says this, and Jim says this, that, well, I don't know, actually, you could tell me if they do or not, but there's a resonance when you're talking to someone or in the same room as someone who's, has their attention on this, or I don't even know how to put it, but, and I'm open to the idea that this is all happening in the brain. I really want to throw as many monkey wrenches into this to avoid people viewing this as a dogma, because this could all just be a hypnosis spell that we've all gone under. I don't know. I'm open to that possibility.
I think for some people it is, because like if we agree with my previous analysis there of what the meetings provide in terms of a reframing, at least in terms of what the words do, I think for some people that reframing doesn't happen. I think that instead one set of personal conceptions, dogma, is exchanged for another set, the open secret set.
Right.
And I think that's the danger, or the limitation rather, not the danger, but the limitation of the message, is that when people come to the meetings and they don't have that flexibility with the way their mind works, that they can just simply put down one framework and pick up another, then naturally the only recourse for them is to just try and fit the open secret framework into what they're already holding on to, which is a personal framework. And when that happens, everything, as you say, becomes dogmatic. And so then the message is one of, okay, there is nothing happening, there is no self, and yet really I still feel like a self, although maybe I won't admit it. And any attempt at seeking is an expression of self, therefore I won't seek, I won't do any seeking, which means I won't meditate, I won't do any spiritual practices, I won't do anything like that, because that's what the self does, and I'm not a self. And I think that really, all that really does is it just exchanges one set of identification for another, and in a way opens the door up for a kind of bypassing, where we deny our own reality, we kind of gaslight ourselves, and we say that our experience of being a self is just an illusion, and therefore it's got no reality at all. When in reality, part of us, at least energetically or emotionally, is still invested in the self. And so then things like meditation and yoga and whatever are a no-no. And even things like therapy, psychotherapy, are a no-no, when those are the things that on an egoic level could be very healthy for us, because psychologically, emotionally, egoically, it could be very important for us as individuals to engage in that work in order to support our health. In the same way that, you know, we brush our teeth, we eat food, we shower. These are all things we do, and no one's needed to do that. But these things we do, and it's what keeps our body healthy. There are other things that we can do to keep our mind healthy. But if we think that doing things to help the mind is an action of seeking, and an action of seeking is an admission of self, which I can't admit to, then we exchange our mental health for investment in a dogma to
Right.
hide the fact.
Frëan, yeah, no, you're bringing up a lot of topics I want to respond to, and
Go for it. Please.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear you say all these things, because yeah, I think we're on a similar wavelength here. And you know, you and I were both attending the gym Zoom meeting last week, and I don't know if you caught this part at the end, but I really loved the last question and answer exchange he had, where someone was asking him about cows and when they grieve, is that different than how humans grieve? And Jim's basic answer was no, not at all. We're all animals, you know, we're all mammals, like it's quite similar. And anyone who's been around cows, when they have the calf taken away after birth, they know that they can sense the sadness from the way it moves, and will go on doing that for 10 days apparently. And you know, just like a human would, you know. And I mean, and so the quote that I wrote down from him was, there doesn't need to be an individual for there to be a sense of loss. And what you were just saying felt very similar, where you were saying there doesn't need to be an individual for the body to take a shower, or perhaps to go do some type of therapy, or body energy work, or anything like this. And other things that come to mind from what you were saying are, you know, Lisa Carnes. I just happened to check out her. I actually haven't seen or heard too much from her personally, but I just checked out her meeting because her name's been coming up a lot lately for some reason from people I've talked to. And the title of her meeting last Sunday was, "It is non-duality gaslighting you?" And that's exactly what you just brought up, the capacity for this message to sort of be turned into a dogma that gaslights. And for those who don't know what this word means, it's basically, the way she defined it was really interesting, actually. She defined it as when your reality is basically being denied and you're being told that there's a different reality. And
I would just twist that a bit, because I don't think it's non-duality that's gaslighting you. I think it's that people fashioning the message from a personal perspective,
right,
are gaslighting themselves. It's not non-duality.
Right.
The person themselves.
Gaslighting themselves, yeah. And in this way, it's like hurt people. So, you know, it, it's endemic, or it's like a virus of the mind, and that's what dogma is. Dogma is, I believe things are a certain way, and that, you know, and I'm going to impose that on everyone else. It's like a conspiracy theory that just spreads, you know, that, you know, and to see that there is no self and experience this contracted energy in the body lift, you know, which was never there in the first place, really. I mean, like, that's not a dogma. That's an experience or an expression of an experience in the body, perhaps in the mind and emotions, that either does or doesn't happen and could be expressed other ways. You know, I've heard people express it enough with enough variety that I don't think there's any one way that everyone's going to ever relate to. Like for me, there's kundalini, there's energy that flows through my body often when there's something that I used to call a samadhi. But I've met so many people who have no experience with energy whatsoever or kundalini, but they speak beautifully about this. Like Nancy Neithercut and Michael Markham, they can speak beautifully from this place, but there's no, yeah, but I asked them and they said no, they've never felt anything like that. But they recognize that some people have, and that we're all different. You know, that there was this UGA Krishnamurti quote, maybe I could pull up, where he talks about, you know, the variety of like flowers in the garden, and which I really love. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so he says, if I compared myself to a saint, it would be my tragedy. We don't belong to a common fraternity, a common brotherhood, or any such thing. What is it that is common to a rose, a daffodil, and a grass flower? Each one is uniquely beautiful in its own way. Each one has its own beauty. Whether you like it or not, that's a different question. like I'm so used to being with the roses because I'm a rose. When I see a daffodil, I'm like, what the hell is that? You know, that's not a rose. Like, can't you be more like a rose daffodil?
And it's kind of like on that level, you know, everyone has their preferences, and so no flower is intrinsically beautiful and or nor ugly. No person is intrinsically bad or good. We all have our own little preferences, and everyone responds to everyone differently based on that.
Absolutely. And yeah, there's some other points I want to get to later in this talk.
One thing I want to clarify from my perspective is like, yeah, so the whole gaslighting thing is like, I don't think that non-duality speakers are deliberately trying to gaslight people.
No.
I also don't think that they have a very ready response to when people are gaslighting themselves, when people are denying their own reality and telling themselves that there is no self, when on some level there clearly is. And I think it'd be good to just say at this point, like the distinction between an ego and a self, because if we accept the term ego from psychology, all it really is talking about is a function of the mind that helps the mind in the way it processes reality. And so there can be an egoic functioning without a self, and there can be healthy egoic functioning and unhealthy egoic functioning. So a healthy ego is one that feels safe and can navigate its reality, navigate its functioning in a good way, in a healthy way. It can take in information and it can respond accordingly. An unhealthy ego would be one that's insecure, one that overreacts unnecessarily to stimuli and isn't able to engage with reality in a skillful way. So there can be healthy ego or an unhealthy ego, whether or not there's a self. However, if there is no self, which we can define as a felt sense of being separate, then it's going to be much easier for the ego to be healthy, because the fundamental criteria for that is the ego feels safe. And if you're feeling separate, it's going to be very hard to feel safe. If you don't feel separate, if it's obvious that this is just love, unconditional, expressing itself boundlessly as all there is, it's going to be much easier to have a healthy self and sustain that.
Right.
I think it's good to distinguish that.
Frëan, okay, so yeah, actually, I was going to put a pin in this topic, but you just dove right in. And so now I really want to respond with this incredible synchronicity of this is exactly what has been arising here in my reality this past week or 10 days, just all of a sudden. And it basically came about because somebody told me about this guy, Matt Kahn, and he was saying, oh, he used to listen to non-duality speakers and Ramana Maharshi, and then but he doesn't anymore in Matt Kahn. And so he listens to him. So I thought, okay, I'll check him out to see what he's saying. And I was expecting something involving embodiment or trauma work or something like that, maybe. But what he actually said was like so much more profound to me. It's almost like this missing piece to the puzzle or angle to the infinite diamond, infinitely sided diamond of truth, you could say, that is very close to what you're saying, pretty much identical. And there's this video, if anyone wants to look it up, it's called The Karmic Return by Matt Kahn on YouTube. But yeah, even that title, it's like the problem with it that I have just as a disclaimer is, you know, he has a lot of framework around it that I don't relate to or resonate with, involving higher dimensions and angels and even the notion of karma and reincarnation. I don't see any of these things as necessary to what you're saying and what I'm seeing right now. Maybe those things are real or maybe not, I don't know. But just to get to the heart of what I've been seeing and processing and talking to people about this past week, it's so he describes it as stages of awakening. So already I know I'm going to lose most of this audience, you know, but he basically says for the more masculine energy, or this is the way I'm just going to say it the way I frame it, actually. But, you know, I would say the more masculine energy, the more yang energy, which on the pathological end of the spectrum is narcissism, basically. That non-duality is this yin, feminine softening to that, you know, very intense, like, this is how it is. Like, this character is real, this ego is very solid. And so to see that there is no one there is actually therapeutic in a sense. It actually softens the narcissistic, hyper-masculine character, and if you want to look at it that way. And then he says the next stage is, well, sort of a return to duality or an embracing of the ego. The way I heard someone in my group say it last night, which was really beautiful, was it's like duality. And this is like what Lisa Lennon says, that non-duality is everything. So why can't it be like energy healing or tarot card reading, you know, or atheism or anything? Whatever this character is expressing, you know, is non-duality as well. And I think the key point here that I got out of this Matt Kahn video was that there's a very different flavor to awakening, or perhaps stage to awakening, apparently. And even Ramana Maharshi said there's this stage, and, you know, even Jim Newman has said there have been apparent stages for him in the deepening. So, you know, I mean, just so people know. But basically it's this, for the more feminine energy, which I would call myself slightly more feminine and whatnot, but it's like the less narcissism pathology, more codependent pathology when I'm mentally not great, you know, in my past or whatever, when I'm triggered, more codependent. And that involves the non-dual message sort of is gasoline to those flames, because it, from the ego perspective, you're denying the ego. You're saying, oh, well, there's no one there. But that could be incredibly unhealthy to someone who doesn't even, who needs a healthy ego. And they're interpreting that at the dualistic level, and it could just fuck people up, and it does. And the other aspect of this I find very interesting is that the feminine energy non-duality is intuitively just known. It's not even as much of a revelation. It's just sort of, it's just like when I talk to my mom about non-duality, which doesn't happen too often, but it's a non-issue. She just gets it, and it's not. She's like, yeah, and so what, you know? But like, but she gets it, and it's that there's no one there, and this is all, you know, a mystery, and all this stuff. It's all love, you know. So I'm throwing all of those things out there, and I apologize for the listeners that my way of describing this is still quite sloppy and meandering, because I'm still working through it myself, you know, or my mind is working through it. And non-duality is just wholeness appearing as this discussion, as masculine and feminine. And the other thing I want to tie into it is the Zen saying, first there's mountains, then there's no mountains, then there's mountains again. And so to me, this feels like then there's mountains again. And whatever those mountains look like are beautiful. And it's somehow, like you said, it's the ego, or whatever you want to call it, the character, the action figure, like Paul Hedderman calls it, it's somehow more exciting and fun and beautiful when you see that there's no fundamental substance there, that it is just wholeness appearing as this, you know, dream, or whatever you want to call it.
I think the main issue there is, because the message is so uncompromising, it tends to conflate doing things that benefit your own well-being with being an activity of self. And with the examples before of brushing your teeth, eating food, showering, maybe going for a walk, you know, we do those things, they benefit our well-being. If we didn't do them, it would be to the detriment of our well-being. Maybe not so much the walk, but the other ones stand as pretty universal examples. But when we start saying things like, when we start conflating things like meditation, yoga, therapy, and just doing nice things for ourselves, energy healing, going and having a nice experience, when we start to conflate those with the behavior of self, and we have this association of self being what I need to get rid of, or I need to deny in order for reality to be reality, in order for this to be non-dual, then a lot of unhealthy behaviors are going to result from that, as my sense, because there can be a real desperation in the system to find that peacefulness, that everlasting serenity. And so when that's associated with the absence of self, and when the absence of self is conflated with doing things that benefit our well-being, that's a very vicious cycle there. And we can easily end up just doing nothing, and going into some really dark spaces mentally, emotionally, where any attempt to come out of that space is wrong, and we just have to stick with it. We have to stay in the desert until hopefully something shifts by itself. And yet there are ways of looking after ourselves, of engaging in activities that are for our well-being, without needing to be invested in a self. We can meditate, we can do yoga, we can engage in therapy, in energy healing, from a selfless place, from a place of recognition that there is no separation, there are no boundaries, there is no self to be identified with, to be attached to. And in fact, when we do engage in those behaviors from that recognition, that then those activities take on a much deeper level, much deeper quality, because they're not restricted by separation and the identification with separation. They're not restricted by the sense that I am a contracted separate being trapped in this body. They're just life expressing itself, the boundlessness expressing itself as energy, as meditation, as yoga.
Yeah, so this other Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. I think the modern version could be before enlightenment, if you need to, go to therapy. After enlightenment, if you need to, go to therapy.
Yeah.
Or any other form of trauma work or therapeutic method. Yeah, and because this is all wholeness, energy, boundless energy arising, and
nothing is denied.
Nothing's denied.
Nothing is denied.
Yeah,
this is a message of freedom.
Absolutely. And for those who haven't heard maybe someone like Jim Newman or Tony explicitly say this themselves, I've watched, like all their billion Jim Newman videos and all that stuff. And I have heard it when it's brought up sometimes where someone describes a psychological issue, or he'll say, or depression, he'll say, well, if the need for therapy arises, then going to a therapy arises. That's just, anything can arise. It has nothing to do with this whatsoever. And yet it all is this. So it's funny, the way somebody put it to me recently is it's almost like the non-duality, it's just a human thing to be tribal, and tribalism is as dualistic as it gets, really. And so non-duality, you could say people that take it as more of a dogma, and there's no choice in them doing that, and that could be a stage in their own awakening of this. But when they do that, they're actually turning non-duality into a duality. They're saying this is non-duality and that isn't. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yet I want to acknowledge that there is also, that there's a clearer way of saying it. That was a really beautiful part of my talk with Jim. The last time we talked, he said that, describing it as a contracted energy in the body leaving, or an expansion or wholeness, these things are more closer to the truth than calling it an airplane. And so I understand why people like to hear the message said in what they would describe as a very clear way. I get that too.
Uncompromising.
Yeah, uncompromising.
Uncompromising, not misleading.
Right.
Yeah. They don't want to create confusion. But my I guess the point I'm wanting to discuss is, well, if the ideal is to not be misleading and not to create confusion, then what is there for people who are already confused, who are already misled, and have become identified with the message to the point where they are denying their own experience. They are denying their own experience of self, of separation, because they feel like that's the only way that they can be happy. And it doesn't, my sense is at the moment, the message hasn't got a ready response to that, because I do see people, and from my own experience with the message, it was never able to really meet me in that and clarify that for me. And in my own experience or my own interpretation of other people coming to the meetings, they seem to be very much stuck in that rut, and the message doesn't really provide anything to really jimmy them out of that rut. But then the message doesn't have any intention or any need to get them out of that rut, because them being in that rut is perfection already. And there's a real beauty and freedom to the expression of that. And at the same time, me as a person, I see a real tragedy to that. That there is the potential for them to come out of that mental trap of denying their self in order to feel free from their self, when really the message is about everything is included, including the experience of self. So my wish would be to try and find a way to meet people who are trapped in that rut and begin to help them to see that the self, separation, identification with separation, all of that is included, doesn't need to be denied. There's nothing is everything, everything, nothing is denied, everything is included.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I had a talk with Giselle Suarez recently, and, you know, I sought out, you know, a conversation with her for this after I heard her speak, because I think a year ago she was speaking in a very uncompromising way about the message. And since then, she's gone to the other end of the spectrum, where she likes to talk about hypnosis and, you know, creativity and color and therapy and all sorts and all sorts of things, you know, as being expressions of this. And so why not talk about them? And this thing that she says I really love is she calls it sandboxes. She says you could be in the radical non-duality sandbox languaging, and that's fine. If that's enjoyable, that's great. Or you could be in the, you know, trauma work sandbox of different modalities of trauma work, you know, or you could be in so many other sandboxes, but you always have the freedom to leave the sandbox, you know, if it doesn't feel good. And I think it's kind of as simple as that on one level, where I think our body.
Well, I would disagree. I don't think that when people are heavily identified with the message that they do feel that freedom. When people are in the message, they're in the message, and any other message is misleading. Any teaching is misleading, and the belief is that if I invest in a teaching or a practice, then I'm reinforcing the self and therefore my own suffering. So when you're in the sandbox of the open secret, it's very hard to climb out. The walls of the sandbox are very narrow and very tall.
Well, yeah, I mean, that could very well be the way it feels. I mean, when I was younger, I was in a cult, you know, and what you're describing to me sounds like being in a cult, you know? But the thing is, I think, and of course, with a cult, there's always degrees of how much the dogma is reinforced and the fear of going outside of its framework. You know, it's always, this is, yeah.
All the fear is for the most part, I would say, self-created. It's the terror
entirely
of living life as a self and desperately not wanting to live life as a self,
and
believing that the only way is to stop seeking. And I wouldn't, just to be clear, I wouldn't want to change the open secret message.
Right.
That message is perfect. It's beautiful, and it's brought so much freedom in my own appreciation of reality. And I guess what I'm looking for is to remedy the tragedy that I see. That's probably just because I'm a self who seeks these kind of things.
No, something else comes to mind I need to say, I guess, about that in particular. But before I put a pin in that for a moment, you and what you're trying to do there. No, I think you're communicating very clearly about all of this. And just to be clear myself, I also think Tony and Jim and all of these speakers are wonderful at expressing it in an uncompromising way. I think, like you said earlier, the problem arises in perhaps the misinterpretation by people that might not be fully in the freedom of that, but in the seeking of wanting that and clinging to it and thinking and being afraid of anything that threatens that, what they think they're trying to get, what they think that is. Because when I talked to Nancy 2 days ago, Nancy Neithercut, she said, I asked her if she had any advice for seekers. It's something that I've been asking a lot of the people I talk to on this. And her advice, what she said was, well, if you're trying to get enlightened, just, you know, get rid of every idea you have about enlightenment. Like, you know, it's like the trying to get it is actually the obstacle. And your idea of what it is what creates the suffering of seeking, you know, and it's freedom from it. That's why it can't be a dogma. And yet, yeah, I mean, Tony says himself in these meetings of the open secret, he says that none of these words he's saying are it, you know, like none of them are really describing it, but he's saying perhaps something else might come across. maybe a resonance in my language. And Nancy says something similar. She says,
he says that the words can have the potential to unravel certain concepts in the mind. I forget how he puts it, but
well, no,
he talks about how things can unravel in the mind,
right.
and then there's the openness to something deeper, something energetic.
Absolutely, yeah. And so he describes what appears to be happening in the open secret meetings as a starving of the seeking energy. That the seeker comes there and they don't get what they want. In fact, what the meeting is doing is it's there to starve the seeking energy. So, which is another way of putting that unraveling, I think. Nancy describes it as handholds and like just ripping away all the handholds, and realizing there never were any, and the languaging of
or nor any hands.
Nor any hands, yeah, nor anyone, yeah. It's this unpointing, like Jim said, and Nancy said, the poetry and the speaking in opposites. It's not there to describe it or to show you what it is. It's there, if anything, to leave you in a space where you know nothing.
Yep. The flat line.
But I'd say as a character, I'm a big fan of the Enneagram personality system, and there's actually been a few other non-dual whatevers that authors and stuff like Stephen Walensky and a couple others who've used that framework, because I find it very useful sometimes on the relative level to really acknowledge our uniqueness of different types of flowers. And so for you, I've done the test with you, and I do these one-on-one things with that sometimes with people. But like with you, like I remember, it's just that you are two. You're a helper. You're a healer. That's just your personality, and there's no getting away from it. You're a lover. You're there to yeah. and
a lover, not a fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm a 4, which would be the artist and the one who goes deep into individual expression and emotional, like, intensity. Like, I'm the only one, like I'm crazy enough to read this vulnerable poem, with my heart broken open when I wrote it 2 nights ago, and have it be seen by, 1,000 people next week or whatever. But that's just the way I am. There's no choice in it. It's not like something I achieved through non-duality or anything. And someone else who's the total opposite of me, non-duality could be expressed by them never opening up so publicly about their personal life or emotions. And that's no less better or worse. It's yeah. So I think another factor there maybe is a lot of people see public speakers, and this is going back to the narcissism versus codependency, masculine feminine spectrum, because someone who just wants to be seen, that's what the character is wired to do, will be out there, and they're the ones saying the message. I mean, and then there are people who are more on the codependent feminine side that are like, oh, I'm not, what, I don't have the confidence to speak like them. Like, I must not get this yet. Like, I don't say it as boldly as they say it, even to my friends. I'm always questioning. But from my perspective, that's just a different expression of the same thing. Like, doubt and certainty are equally valid expressions of this.
Yeah, we don't want to be investing in either states, because if we become reliant on certainty, then the moment doubt comes along, we're rudderless, we're without any foundation. Attachment to certainty is just the same as any attachment. I think what you're describing is what I'm trying to invite in, is this appreciation of our personal needs, our personal yearning for well-being, and that is justified, and that is healthy and normal, and that there doesn't need to be a self, doesn't need to be an investment in a felt sense of separation. We don't need to have this contracted energy of separation here in order for there to be that engagement in our own well-being, that exploration of how to restore and to sustain our own well-being. Just as we don't think twice about brushing our teeth, we could not brush our teeth, and our life would be more difficult for it. But just because we brush our teeth, that doesn't mean that we're investing in selfhood, because the main purpose of it is to sustain our well-being. And the same thing of like, one argument is, well, you can do yoga, you can do meditation, and it will make you feel better for a little while. Well, the same with brushing your teeth. You can brush your teeth and your teeth will stay clean for a little while. So there's really no reason to deny any of these things, any of these personal needs. On a human level, it's healthy to take care of ourselves, look after ourselves, look after our mental health, and do whatever it takes to be a healthy, skillfully functioning human.
Right.
This goes back to the cows. Like the mama cow, she spends all those days wailing because that's what she needs to do to get back to a state of sanity. That's how she deals with her distress, and through crying out like that, she relieves her grief, and she comes to a place where she feels okay to continue. She may well be traumatized on some level, but by doing that, she's in a better state than she would otherwise have been. And the more classic example is when ducks fight.
I was just thinking of that, the Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. They fight, and then once they're done fighting, they just shake it off, like Taylor Swift encourages us all to do.
Absolutely, yeah. And the distinction there, I know the point Eckhart Tolle made when he said that was that humans will have a story attached where maybe they're still thinking about that fight for the rest of the day or month or lifetime. And this is like that Zen story of the two monks that were crossing the river, and they're not allowed to like touch a woman or whatever. But there's a woman that needs to get across the river, and she doesn't want to get her dress wet or something, or I don't know. But the guy carries her, the older monk, and then they part ways. And then the two monks continue to walk, and then like at the end of the night, the younger monk says, like, I have to ask you, like, why did you do that? You swore an oath to never like touch a woman. And then he said like, oh, are you still carrying her in your mind? I dropped her off like early, 20 hours ago, whatever.
Yeah.
And
I think
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, there was another point in there I want to get to the crux of while it's fresh. I want to ask you on, because I know with seekers, people who identify as seekers, they're often looking at conversations like this and with comparing people who talk about this to each other, and they're trying to like find the common denominator, or they're trying to find if there's levels to awakening and who's the most awakened or enlightened, and who is fooling themselves or hypnotized, or who is has a spiritualized ego. And so when you're describing like brushing your teeth being similar to maybe needing to go to yoga or meditate to relax the body or the mind, which is really, I consider the mind part of the body, really, coming from the brain and whatnot, or energy or whatever. But yeah, so I guess what does here's like the silly question I want to ask you. What do you think enlightenment looks like? Is there a common denominator or way that it looks?
I don't know if there is such a thing as enlightenment. If there was, then I would, like, I guess in the past I had an idea of what enlightenment would be. Enlightenment would be the absence of any trace of this energy of separation and the investment and identification with such energy. And if I kind of tie this into what you were saying just now about carrying the story on, whereas the duck just shakes it off immediately, as people, we tend to carry the story on. The root of that for me is this identification with separation, and separation being a felt energetic sense in the body of being this body, being this person, being this character, being this ego. It's kind of like the contraction of separation is synonymous with the identification with separation. Contraction is identification. It's that energy of it's like an energetic clenched fist. And with the beauty of that analogy is like a clenched fist, it's not clenching anything, it's not holding anything. All there is to the clenched fist is the clenching. The moment that clenching unravels, surrenders, there's nothing there. And all that the message is saying, all that non-duality is saying, is there is no clenchedness. There's nothing to clench. And the sense that this clenchedness is real is just an illusion. It's just energy appearing in that way. And then to give it an identity, a separate personal identity, that is an illusion. It's just energy. And if it's energy that can be in this form, it's also energy that can be in this form. And it's also energy that can be in no form, because it's just energy. And we've experienced for ourselves when that energy is tighter. We can feel it in our body. We can see it in our thought patterns. And we know there's times when that energy is tighter for the same reasons. And my experience has been one where, through going to meetings with Tony and others, through when meditation is happening, when yoga is happening, when energy healing is happening, this contractedness relaxes. And what really can precipitate that relaxation is a clear recognition, an impersonal recognition, that there is no self in reality. There is no personal identity in reality. There is just energy. There's no edge to that energy. There's no boundary to it. It's boundless. It's infinite. It's timeless, dimensionless. And there's no center to it. There's no point that I can point to say, this is it. This is me. There's just energy. And at times there is an identification with that energy. But that identification, which is tension, can relax and contract like a starfish. And that's natural. It's just nature doing its thing. And there are activities that, when engaged in, such as meditation, such as energy healing and yoga, help to relax. Just as brushing your teeth can help to relax this energy.
Yeah,
Brushing your teeth can bring you a sense of cleanness, which can help to ease stuff right down to the center. But you can also brush your teeth in a way that increases the tension. You can meditate in a way that increases the tension. And you can go to a Tony Parsons meeting and you can listen to this message of freedom, and it can have the effect of causing you to tense even more. So it's not the activity, it's how the activity is being activated, whatever that word is, how the activity is being experienced.
Yeah. Right. So I get everything you're saying.
Participated in. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that last thing you said?
Yeah, it's how the activity is being done.
Right.
Not that there's anybody doing it, but there are, of course, different ways of doing things.
So
and there doesn't have to be anyone
right
there in order for that to be done in a way that is, you could say, liberating, freeing.
Right. No, I understand. Yeah. So Yeah, the way it appears to me, I think there's just a different aspect of this, like I said, infinitely sided diamond of what can't be said that I tend to focus on at the moment than what you're saying. Because the way I'm looking at it right now is more of the dropping away of well, more of the embracing of whatever is happening as just wholeness arising as that, and really there being not much more to be said other than that. I mean, and yet we can have these, hour, 2 hour long conversations forever, but that are so exciting. But that's the point, is that this is where life is happening. It's where it's arising, and you could say, yes, nothing is happening. And we could point back to this, whatever you want to call it, like the contracted energy and all of that. But what I see is that, I've had experiences, is what I would say, and I'm very reticent to say that there is any shift that I could ever have that would just be, oh yeah, before that shift, blah blah blah, after that shift, blah blah blah. To me that just doesn't make sense, and it's not my experience, and I don't expect it to ever be my experience or expression. Maybe is a better way to put it, because I have had shifts where before I was one way, after I was never the same, but then I had more of those. And I don't expect that to ever stop, because the way I see it is it's like how Nisargadatta said that all you can ever know, like Jim says that knowing is, or he says seeking is just knowledge leading to more knowledge. And Nisargadatta said that all you can ever know is the content of your consciousness, that you can never know pure consciousness, like seeking, like the feeling or the experience of no more contracted energy. This, to me, this is just another way of describing silence, which is just another word that doesn't work. None of the words work, and it's an experience that people have that may come or go, but to me it's like, it's also the seeking, it's also the delusion and the feeling of liberation. It's not giving a shit about any of this. It's like it's all wholeness being expressed perfectly as it is. And maybe I just feel compelled to put it that way because I don't hear anyone else putting it that way right now. I don't actually think what I'm saying invalidates what anyone else is saying, because I agree with exactly the way you were putting it and the way Tony and Jim put it and everyone else, really. I think this goes back to just this framework of flowers in the garden, and that's what makes conversation about this so fun, is we all have slightly different, things to offer and interact with.
Mm-hmm. I think the big thing for me recently has been the recognition that everything this is energy, and the nature of this energy is essentially loving. So it's the recognition that everything, no matter how awful, no matter how contracted, defensive, anxious, hateful it appears to be, essentially what it's structurally, where it's coming from, is a place of love, is a place of loving and a yearning to be loving, because that's its nature. So of course it yearns to be that. And then that energy gets filtered through the sense of being separate, sense of being identified as being separate. And that's when all the trouble begins, because then that energy of being love and of yearning to be love, to be loving, then gets contracted into a separate form that then needs to protect itself in an environment of potentially hostile threats that are constantly shifting, constantly changing. There's no stability to any of it. There's no foundation to any of it, no structure to any of it. And that's very disconcerting to something that's holding tightly to essentially nothing, because its investment is in being something that it can protect and keep safe, when its nature is nothing. And I think that that framing for me has been really helpful to see that even though the expression of my mind and my behavior can be anxious and defensive and at times angry and aggressive in the defense of that identification, all of that is coming from a place of love. All of that is essentially an expression of a loving yearning to connect and be seen as unconditional, boundless love. So even that anxiety is love being anxious. Even that anger is love being angry, because it's just confused, it's just deluded. And there's a real a childlike innocence to that bit, in that it's just hasn't learned yet, it's not matured yet to understand what its real nature is. And so I do see this as a process of maturation, apparently, and I don't know if there is an end point, such as enlightenment. I suppose you could argue for a waypoint where before enlightenment there is identification, and after enlightenment there isn't. But that doesn't mean there's an end to this expression of life and the deepening exploration and the ever complexifying expression of life, like the fractals of ever complicatedness of patterns as they continue to blossom.
Right.
I don't see there being any end to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because the idea of all of these words, like integration, the word integration is interesting to me because it feels like it implies there is an endpoint somehow to me. Because when you think of like a object that's broken into 1,000 pieces, the mind could imagine how it could all integrate back to a whole. But I don't think this is like that. I think the integration is never ending because, this whole apparent universe of separation, and the body is just going to live until it's dead, but then its matter feeds insects and worms and animals. Like I remember you were walking one time and you showed me, there was a picture, you were walking, there was like a badger or badger, yeah, that was like completely just, it looked like it had a white body, and then when you got closer to it, its entire body was eaten by maggots, and what I was looking at was hundreds of maggots eating it. And it was incredible, because that's just life continuing. And actually what you said, that's an image, that's a metaphor I've really just struck me a couple weeks ago, of the fractal. And that when you look, if you look this up on YouTube, anyone who's watching, just type in fractal zoom and you'll get a perfect visual analogy of what this is, what I'm describing, what you're describing, where it's like you zoom in and there's always this feeling that you're getting closer to the final image of what it's zooming into, but it never does. It's always not quite there. There's always another picture yet to unfold. And so to me, enlightenment is this, it's like the point that's never reached by anything that could be observed or experienced. And so in that way, the experience of spirituality or non-duality, for lack of a better word, the experience of wholeness or unconditional love is this ever unfolding, blossoming lotus flower, or ever zooming in fractal, where you're never, how could you possibly land anywhere?
And I think even like our criteria for this is this energetic tension, and this tension, this tense energy of identification. So even if that falls away, that doesn't mean to say that it's not present for other people. And as essentially all this is energy, then like that process isn't done, because there's nothing separating this being called Frëan and that being called art. And so even if that process of the collapse of the energy of separation is done in art, it still can be continuing in Frëan, and the interactions between art and Frëan are supporting that. And in that way, in that like universal sense of there being no art and no Frëan, the process is never done.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's how I feel, and that's how it appears to me. And
There is no personal enlightenment.
Yeah, I mean, again, to me, like the really grounding way to look at this, that's not even spiritual, is that it's per se, very little woo-woo, and just saying that it's all happening in the body. I can't experience what's happening in your body or Tony's or anyone's, but in my body, yes, there is this falling away of belief in an individual. And I would say that the way Paul Hedderman puts it really resonates for me, because he doesn't talk too much about endpoints ever, but he talks about the action figures, he calls it, tends to travel lighter as a byproduct of this. As far as how much lighter, like I like the word lighter. It's not lightest, it's not a superlative. Mm-hmm. It's not A to B. It's a direction. It's a direction of, and in a sense, this may be another way of putting when Ramana said, that the body mind has its own destiny, that there's no free will really, but he said that the one choice you do have is whether you identify with this character, with this body, or whether you inquire within. He didn't say whether you realize there is no self or there's only that. He said to ask who am I. It was always a direction with nowhere to land. And so the way that's going to manifest, which could include the way that we describe it, the mouth noises our bodies yap about, is we're going to use words like deepening, lighter, as time goes on, like someone like Tim Freak, who wrote like 14 books, and then he reached a point where he said, oh, all those books were bullshit. Now my new books are the ones that really capture this. It's like that. And apparently 15 years ago, Tony Parsons had a very different languaging, and that's changed over time. And Jim had the contracted energy go away. And then he said at some point after he'd already been speaking about that, he said that it did deepen. He said it appeared to deepen. And he said, and his description of that was that there was still some expectation of happiness, and that went away. The happiness was needed, or something like that went away, even after the contracted energy went away. So to me, this is all like a poetic expression of a continuous fractal zoom. You could just call life living itself as this body, that body, in an apparent universe where the only constant that could ever be is change.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a tremendous conversation. I don't really have any other points that I feel.
It's been a trip.
It's been a trip down the Zoom into fractal land, and I mean, I love you. Yeah. Is there anything else on your heart or mind that you'd like to express that hasn't been said?
No, I'm complete. Yeah, I think we've said it all. There's a deep yearning in me to explore and express freedom in whatever way can most effectively communicate that.
Freedom for free on.
Yeah, free. I'm a Frëan. I'm a Frëan.
So you're a free one, yeah. And I guess there's one final question, jumping all the way back down to earth and just asking you this this name that you've chosen for yourself or came to you about a year ago, Frëan, would I remember you described to me what it means, and I thought it was really beautiful. And I was wondering if you could remind me of what that was, why you chose this name.
Yeah, I'll see if I can remember. My logical rationale at the time, well, initially it just came, and then I built the rationale in afterwards.
Right.
So free, obviously, because it's free, and this sense of freedom, just freedom, not freedom from, not freedom to, just freedom, is very, very close to my heart. And then there was something about An being the so An is the god from the Sumerians, I believe, who had the Anunnaki as their pantheon, and An was the god of healing, and Ea is in Viking Norse mythology. Ea was a Valkyrie, who was the Valkyrie, the goddess of healing as well. So it was cool for me that we had we had Ea and An in this sound that came to me one day in meditation, and they all had this association of freedom and healing, which is something I'm very drawn to naturally. I find like when I feel most invigorated, most alive, those are the experiences and activities that I'm engaged in. So yeah, that was pretty cool.
It's beautiful, Frëan. I love the name and I love the description. And it did bring to mind one more thought I'd just like to share is this was coming to me during like a kind of samadhi experience the other night of like lighting light. But this is like, this is a way of looking at healing, I think, from this non-dual perspective, in a sense, that light is shedding light to itself in the form of Frëan to another, or the message of Tony to Frëan. But the light that's receiving, appears to be in the body form, or could appear to be in the story that could be heavy. And so when the light shines onto light in the form of a heavy story, it would become lighter. The light lightens light. And it already always is light. But in seeing that and expressing that, there is an appearance of the contracted energy being released, or the character just traveling lighter.
And just as if you take one flaming log and put it next to another flaming log, perhaps a log that's flaming even brighter than your log, together they create even greater flames. And so I think it's the way in which we gather like this and in meetings is how we learn to become even brighter, and the benefit for our well-being is just something naturally that we yearn to explore and dive more deeply into. And I think the crucial thing is that it's not through seeking outwardly, as all non-dual messages describe. It's not through seeking outwardly that this brightness comes. It's just through being, just through resting inwardly. It's just, or not even needing to do anything, but just through being itself, that this brightness is apparent. And so there is a distinction between seeking and this movement of freedom, this movement of enlightening, and there is value in the message that says seeking is not going to get you there, but it's more nuanced than things like what practices you engage in. It's more about how you are rather than what you're doing, and that's true for whether you're doing yoga or not. It's about how you're brushing your teeth. It's about how you're eating your breakfast, and the way in which you approach that, the way in which you engage in that, can be significantly different, and the well-being you feel in yourself and how you experience life will be changed as a result of that. That's all I got to say about that.
Beautiful, Frëan. Yeah. I just wanted to mention, when you mentioned the burning logs next to each other, I interpreted it this other way of, oh, they're gonna help each other to disintegrate more quickly. You know, it's it's a brighter flame. It's hot, but it's also like, you know, this, you know, I mean, the thing that Rick Archer will, you know, often say to his guests, you know, that, you know, getting drunk, you know, or see, I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to get prescriptive, you know, because it's like you said, it really is, you know, and that is why I resonate so deeply with the Tony message. But also, I did practice self-inquiry as a practice and surrender as a practice until they became something that I wouldn't call a practice. And I can't say one led to the other, but I also can't say that they didn't. So yeah, I wouldn't discourage anyone or encourage anyone necessarily from any, yeah, I mean, brushing your teeth is good though. Yeah.
We can support that.
Yeah, we can support that. Well, yeah, well, I appreciate this conversation, Frëan. It was really a pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, nice one.
All right. Peace.
Nice one.